This guy is a remarkable person whose body of work, I think, is so impressive that I'm compelled to share it with you, in part anyway. He is the Higgins Professor in the Department of Microbiology and Immunology at Columbia University's College of Physicians and Surgeons. He's co-author of a textbook on virology. It's called Principles of Virology. As a postdoctoral fellow in David Baltimore's laboratory at MIT, Racanello used recombinant DNA, that's RNA, isn't it, to clone and sequence the genome of the small poliovirus that shows up in animals. It's an RNA animal virus. Using those tools that he had generated, he created the infectious clone of an animal RNA virus. And in this way, revolutionized modern virology. Some of that I didn't completely butcher, but does reflect the immense honor it is to have him here, all kidding aside. So excited to have Dr. Vincent Racanello here.
Thank
Hello,
you.
sir.
My pleasure to be here.
Wow. I want to start on something that I just mentioned, which is this RNA, which we all became aware of when COVID hit. We talked about mRNA, this messenger RNA, and the idea somehow that COVID-19 could be blunted in its effects based on the fact that this inoculation was going to message our bodies and our immune systems in some way to help us ward it off. Can you speak to both the technology and also was that a reasonable understanding on our part?
Well, as you know, our code is DNA in our body, right? But RNA is a messenger. It's an intermediary. It's used to send information from the nucleus out into the cell to get things done. And so many years ago, people thought, why don't we make vaccines out of mRNA? mRNA encodes all the proteins that make us. And so for many years, people worked on getting that to work, get rid of all the problems. And then COVID comes along and we try it. And it worked. Despite the naysayers, it worked. It was incredibly safe. It let people go back to work. And that's validated this mRNA platform for use in vaccines.
And when you say it works, what we were learning early on was, or at least messaged early on was, hey, and by the way, I should just say this so you know, because I know this is your first visit to us. I think I had 4 COVID vaccines, and I'm not. My orientation isn't against vaccines at all. It is, in fact, trying to understand why the efficacy of the vaccines seem to diminish, why some of the messaging associated with early on seem to no longer be applicable. I always assumed it was because the landscape of the virus was changing, and so the vaccine that I was getting wasn't able to actually attack that mutation. Can you speak to the sort of the changing nature of the message and the changing nature of the virology involved?
Yeah, that's a tough and long question. The vaccines were released at the end of 2020, and it enabled many people to go back to work. But we had no idea how long they would last. And we're still learning about this. The virus has certainly changed many times, and that contributes to the perceived lack of efficacy. But I've had 3 vaccines, mRNA vaccines, one less than you. I have had COVID once, and I took care of it with an antiviral. And if I get it again, that's what I would do. And so,
And you're saying that it was easily taken care of because you feel you'd had the vaccine.
I had the vaccines and I took an antiviral drug, and I think the combination is the way to do it. Now, the problem is that many people have other illnesses, and so vaccines don't work as well in them. And all of these negatives were amplified. There was some myocarditis initially associated with vaccination, and people distrust something new, right? It was the word experimental kept popping up around mRNA vaccines, despite the fact that right in front of our eyes, it's working. And now it's in over hundreds of millions of people, and it is very safe and very effective. So I think it's an amazing development, and hopefully the naysayers will not prevent us from going forward with other vaccines using mRNA technology.
And the disposition of the government now, which has been populated by a lot of the anti-vax community, and the leader of this anti-vax community running HHS, a lot of the funding associated with this, I've been following it quite closely, has been drawn off, has been canceled, has been sidelined as, again, the entire disposition toward vaccine policy has been suspect now under RFK Jr.
There are all kinds of problems when you install anti-vaxxers, not only as the head, but the committee at CDC that debates how vaccines are to be used is full of non-science anti-vaxxers. None of these people are qualified for what they've been appointed to do. And you already saw RFK Jr., unilaterally removing COVID vaccines from pregnant women and young children. Pregnant women, which every country in the world recognizes as a risk factor for severe COVID. Only the US now is not going to immunize pregnant women. So they ignore the science and just do what they would like to do. And this is extremely disturbing.
Well, I'm seeing the reemergence of measles. I mean, I'm just astounded by this.
We've had many, many cases of measles, more so than in decades. And that outbreak could have been stopped if someone had stood up and said, we need to vaccinate everyone in these areas. But RFK Jr. never said that. And so the outbreak continues, and other infectious disease outbreaks will likely emerge as well.
Well, just on that, as you game it out, not that you think a lot about this, but I would think you think about it more than others. Where are we with these new vulnerabilities that have been exposed as a result of U.S. policy?
Well, you see already measles is a problem. More and more measles cases are occurring. Other vaccines will shortly follow. I do think that his overall tone of anti-vaccine, that they're dangerous, that they do worse harm than good, which is complete nonsense, of course. This takes people who are right on the edge of getting vaccinated. It convinces them not to get vaccinated. So what are we going to see? We've already seen more influenza in kids than we ever did. We're probably going to see more hepatitis B because he thinks that kids shouldn't be vaccinated against it. We're going to likely see more polio. Can you
Well,
imagine?
we have some listeners who are survivors of polio. Uh, one of whom, as I recall, he got the vaccine, but not before polio had already taken a little bit of his movement away. He was in a specific circumstance whereby, he just got the polio vaccine, not quite in time, but almost in time. And he's now seen a reemergence of polio in his own life because the polio vaccine wasn't, as I say, administered. I mention him because I think he's reflective of a lot of our listeners who see the success of polio. It was just an extraordinary thing. It changed the culture. And to hear you say that we'd actually see the reemergence of polio, it's crazy.
It's totally crazy. And it's crazy for all these diseases, which are vaccine preventable, right? And polio is the poster child of vaccination, right? Salk and Sabin developing vaccines that got rid of paralyzed kids, no longer kids getting paralyzed. And we're so fortunate to be at that point. And now he has gone on record saying that the polio vaccine is more dangerous than polio itself, which is absolute nonsense and complete disinformation. And so I think a lot of people will stop getting vaccinated. They'll stop vaccinating their kids. And in a few years, we'll see outbreaks of polio. Really, really horrible.
You're a scientist, and so I hesitate to ask you this, but I know your podcast, which we will have a link to, so we will hopefully show you some love that way, because I think you talk about some good stuff. There it is, microbe.tv. The politics of this, the reasons behind this, conspiracy theories exist and get momentum for a lot of reasons. But RFK Jr. and the US government reflecting this conspiracy theory informed policy, I'm wondering if there's another motivation, money. I always feel like if something doesn't make sense, it goes back to money somehow. Is there a monetary inducement for RFK Jr. and his ilk? Maybe it's not him personally, but people around him. Why turn US government policy and medicine on its side this way over an unproven skepticism?
Well, I think in the case of RFK Jr., I think there are two reasons. One is monetary. He certainly makes money consulting for law firms that sue companies that make vaccines that they think have caused damage, right? Personal injury, and he consults for them, which in any other administration wouldn't be permitted, right? And now we see this happening. So I think that's one motivation. You think he can make many millions of dollars a year doing that. But the other one is he is a zealot. He does not believe in infectious diseases, right? He has written a book saying that he believes in miasma, right? Bad air. That's what causes everything. And viruses and bacteria are just passengers that do nothing. So he's convinced that vaccines have no effect, that it just caused chronic illnesses, which now he wants to get rid of by discontinuing vaccines. So I think it's both. I think it's money, and he has the beliefs. He feels that he has been sent from above to make children better.
So, in your research that does continue, your colleagues who continue with research, I mean, it's such high end specific research. I read when COVID hit the book about mRNA. It's sadly, I remember so little of it, but the CRISPR technology, as I recall, where there's a splicing. You can maybe you it can explain it or not if it's not super relevant. But I guess what I'm asking you is, as coexisting with this policy that we just described with RFK Jr., the anti-vaxxers, et cetera, coexisting is still great scientific research that's going on. To what extent does that research continue, animated perhaps, and supported by monies out of pharmaceutical companies, et cetera, that do this research? And to what extent is it hobbled because U.S. policy now is such that a lot of the U.S. dollars that support that kind of research are no longer available?
No, I think that Americans should be very worried because for over 50 years, the NIH was a huge contributor to our health. The discoveries made not just at NIH, but by NIH funded research elsewhere were enormous, contributing to all kinds of things that make us live longer. And that's slowing because of the cuts in many ways. My university lost all of its NIH funding because of arguments with the administration. And so we're getting fewer trainees now. The future scientists are not being trained because there's no money to do that any longer. And these are long-term effects, but you get rid of laboratories and research now, and then in 5, 10 years, you see the outcomes. We're no longer leaders in innovation, and we can't help our own citizens be healthier.
This last thing that you just mentioned is kind of where I wanted to finish up, which is sort of the expected brain drain. I think what's happening in America is two things, and I'm just curious to know your thoughts. It strikes me that one of those things is what you're speaking of, which is the lack of science dollars, of training. It's as though we no longer want the leadership role that we've had in the world, with all of these different sciences coming together to produce some of the best work in American and even world history. And the other is our immigration policy. I think we've come down really hard on immigrants, brilliant researchers who come here and go to institutions of learning like yours and work with some of the great minds in American modern history, like you. And those researchers are thinking twice. And in fact, I've read chapter and verse about how they are not coming to America any longer. They're considering other places of residence and other areas in which they can do lab work that will be unimpeded by some bizarre immigration policy.
Well, they're not welcome. That's the problem. As you know, this country was built on immigrants. My father was an immigrant as well as many others, and that's how science works. To get approaches from all over the world. You know, the American approach is not the only approach possible. I've had so many students from other countries in my laboratories over the years. Then they get trained, they contribute, they go back to their countries and spread science. There's nothing better than that. That's how it works. And the US has been an incredible engine for that. We're admired for our research. We're duplicated and imitated in all other countries. I don't understand why that has to be broken. It makes zero sense at all. We had a wonderfully functioning system of innovation. It was an economic driver as well, besides the health benefits. And now you just take a sledgehammer to it and break it. I'm sure every country in the world is looking at us and going, why would they do that? Why would you break something that's so good?
I want to finish up by asking you about bird flu. And I know we're here in California, and we seen the cases of bird flu. Uh, and I wonder if you could just speak to where it is in terms of its evolution as you see the virus evolve, whether or not this is a threat. So far, it seems to be a threat. Isn't this right, Doctor, to dairy workers and to those who work with poultry? And in other words, these are the people who work around, as I understand it, animals. They are most exposed, but they were also getting treatment, I thought, from an inoculation or some kind of treatment. Can you speak to this and sort of where we are with bird flu and these viruses that exist in those environments?
So when you say bird flu, you probably are referring to this avian influenza virus, H5N1, although there are
Right.
other ones we could worry about as well. But that's the one that's spread globally. And the concerning part is it's spread by birds who are incredibly mobile, right? They can go anywhere. And so they spread the virus all over. They spread it to other animals, including cows in the US now, where we have this massive outbreak in cows. And also other mammals have been infected and are threatened as well, besides humans. So humans are in contact with all these farm animals. And so it is a concern. Right now, it does not transmit well from human to human. And we don't know if it ever will be able to. That's the future. And we can't predict that, as Yogi said, right? So what are we left with? This virus has been circulating for over 50 years. It has never become a human virus. It doesn't mean that it won't. So what should we do? We should be ready for it. What should we should have antivirals, which we already have, because influenza, we do have antivirals that work against H5N1, and we should have vaccines, which have been developed and continue to be developed as well. And we should do surveillance. We're doing all three of those things. And I think we're in a better position to be ready if there should be a pandemic caused by H5N1 virus than we were in 2020 when COVID emerged.
Do you think that the COVID pandemic was caused by that wet market narrative, or do you think that the narrative that makes more sense is the lab leak narrative? Which one have you found yourself most uh, subscribing to?
As you know, I'm a scientist, and what are scientists convinced by? Data. And we have a lot of data which indicate the live animal market in Wuhan as the epicenter for the outbreak. We have data showing that it first came from animals at that market into humans, and all the initial cases were around the market. I don't see any evidence whatsoever for a lab origin, and I know many prominent people in the world think so, but I'd like to see their PhDs first in virology before I believe them. So this virus, like every other virus that has infected humans, came from nature.
I love that you slummed it with us. You're a big brain guy, and I really enjoyed this conversation. And I've gone back and I've watched a few of your podcasts, and I'll go back and watch more and continue to. We'll have a link to your podcast, obviously, under this video. But one of the things I remark on to myself as I watch it is you have a great relationship with the people who watch and contribute to your podcast. It's a really special thing. So clearly the scientist in you is paired with some other big-hearted part of you because you have a really great relationship. You have a very great kind of across the fence style, and I applaud you for that. It's really something special.
Well, as a radio person, I appreciate that very much.
Yeah. Uh, Come again. Sadly, oh, there, Tony's got some of your show up there.
That's my live stream.
Why is the doctor's lighting better than my lighting, Tony? Is that, I mean, I'm just saying. As I say, it's a microbe.tv. Microbe TV is where you microbe.tv. Microbe TV is where you can find it. Microbe TV on YouTube. And wish you well and thank you again, Dr.
My pleasure.
Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.